Hi YouTube. Today I'll be talking about why it's important to adjust your chain and show you the process that I use to do so. So all of the settings I use in this video are for my current bike, which is an NC750X 2023 version. I believe that the same settings are used for the 2021 version through to the current version, the 2024 version. But the process will be the same for virtually any other motorcycle that's got a chain drive. But please check the settings in your current maintenance manual for your particular motorcycle. So on my bike, I to recommend checking the chain tension every 600 miles, which is 1,000 kilometers. Although I find that if you have an automatic oiler fitted, these checks do not need to be that frequent. But it is recommended that you follow the OEM's, the original equipment manufacturer's recommendations. Checking the tension is straightforward and is a simple thing. And I tend to check it after each wash. So every time I wash the bike, the chain will be getting wet and I need to re-lube it anyway. So I do those checks at the same time. So why is it important? Well, if the chain is too tight, what you run the risk of is it snapping. Plus, you also will induce quicker wear to the sprockets and also cause the chain to stretch quicker. So that will require you to replace the sprockets and the chain a lot quicker. But there is a bit of a safety risk there in that if the chain snaps, it can do quite a lot of damage. And if you think where it's running, it could hit your legs. I've had that before. So too loose, and what you then do is you run the risk of the chain either jumping a tooth on the sprocket, and if it's really loose, it potentially can flap around and damage the swing arm, and it could come off. So either is bad, and a correctly adjusted chain is definitely the way to go. And if you've got that correctly adjusted chain, it will lengthen the life of the chain and the sprockets, and it will also, I find, result in a much more positive gear change. Anyway, that's why we should do it. So let's get into how. And first of all, we'll talk about how to check the chain slack. Right, checking the slack on a chain is a quick and simple thing to do. Um, Firstly, place the motorcycle on the side stand. This is quite important as Honda's tolerances are calculated with the weight of the bike loading the suspension. So for my bike, the slack tolerances are 25 millimeters to 35 millimeters, which is 1 inch to 1.4 inches. And the way I measure this is to place a self-standing tape measure on the floor. Note the measurement on one of the pins on one of the chain links, and then lift the chain up until I feel sort of a slight resistance, and then note the second measurement. I then subtract one away from the other, and then you have your slack measurement. I try to measure the slackest part of the chain, and I determine that before I put it on the side stand. And I also try to do that in the midpoint of the run between the two sprockets, if that's possible. You need to find a place that you can measure it well. If it falls outside of the manufacturer's tolerances, then the chain needs adjusting. So we'll now look at that. And firstly, we'll look at what tools we need to carry out that procedure. The tools you will need to complete this on my bike are as follows. You will need a torque wrench to torque the rear wheel axle nut once you've finished the procedure, a 27mm socket for the axle nut, a 22mm spanner to hold the rear axle nut whilst you're undoing and tightening the axle nut, a 12mm spanner to undo the adjuster lock nut, a 40mm spanner to tighten and loosen the adjuster nuts, a 5mm Allen key to remove the chain guard, and a nylon hammer to tap the axle nut and assist with adjustment. I'll explain a bit more about that when we get to that part of the procedure. Optional, and it's really helpful, is to have a chain alignment tool, but there are other ways in which you can do that if you don't own one of them. And once we have all these tools together, we can then start the chain adjustment procedure. Firstly, we need to remove the chain guard. This is optional, although doing so provides you with greater visibility. What it involves is using an Allen key to remove the two bolts as indicated. For me, these bolts have a way of going missing, so I place them on a magnetic strap, to stop them getting lost. If you don't have a magnetic strap or magnetic bowl, keep them safe to avoid the frustration associated with losing them. Searching around my garden looking for bolts and lengthens the amount of maintenance tasks that I have to do. So keep those two bolts safe. Once the chain guard is removed, you can then visually inspect the chain slider for wear and damage. You can see where it's located, a simple thing to do. The next step is to loosen the lock nuts on the adjusters and loosen the axle bolt using a 27mm socket and a 22mm spanner. And this should be a straightforward thing and shouldn't need any further explanation. Right, adjusting the chain tension can be a bit fiddly to do, and you might need to have numerous goes at this. So make your adjustments, small adjustments at each time. If the chain is slack, then what I recommend you do is use a 14mm spanner and then turn the adjuster nuts clockwise, a quarter of a turn at a time on both sides of the axle, and then just keep doing your checks until you reach the required adjustment and get the chain within tolerance. If the chain is tight, then you'll need to loosen the adjusters back a bit, and then using the nylon hammer tap the axle forward with small even taps on both sides until you get the required tolerances within the chain slack. Personally, I prefer to slacken the adjuster nuts off completely, and then using my nylon mallet is just tap the axle on both sides with small taps until I get the required adjustment. And then once I've got that required adjustment, I then sort of wind in the adjuster nuts to take up any slack and position the plate in the swing arm. When you're doing this, just remain conscious that you need to align the front and rear sprockets so that the chain runs true. Hence, what you do on one side needs to be repeated on the other. So what we do now is we'll talk about how we check for chain alignment. Right, there are a number of ways that you can check that your rear sprocket is correctly aligned with your front sprocket, and therefore your chain is going to run true between the two. The first two methods shown require no special tools, just a tape measure, whilst the last involves the use of a chain alignment tool. The first method is to measure the distance between the centre of the rear axle and a fixed point on the swing arm, and then make small adjustments either side until the measurements match on both sides. Please remember that small adjustments to the axle are likely to affect the chain slack, so frequent checking is required. The second method is the one I like, and that involves spinning the wheel a few rotations to allow the chain to settle into its own position, its natural run. You may need to place the bike on the centre stand to do this, and once you've done that, you can return it to the side stand. And then undertake a visual check or measure that the teeth of the rear sprocket are running central within the chain. Small adjustments can be made if that's not the case either side to get that alignment correctly. The last method is to use a chain alignment tool. And that really is, that's all it's doing is just provide you with another visual aid, another way to see that that chain is running true. These will fix to the rear sprocket, and as you can see they use a small rod that sticks out a little bit further, and you're able to line that rod up with the chain, and you'll get a good indication as to whether the sprocket and the chain are in line, and then yet again you can make what adjustments you need. The one I've got is one of the cheaper ones. Like I say, it's just a visual aid. There are more complex ones that use lasers, but for me they're nice to have, but not a necessity. When I come to do my chain, I tend to use all three methods just to double check again. And you will note that also on the actual bike itself there are some adjustment plates. There's like little graduation marks by the adjuster plates on both sides. These can be used, and they can give you a visual alignment aid to make sure that that's axle is aligned within the swing arm properly, although I prefer not to rely on these. It's a personal choice. Anyway, there you go. If you do that, you should have a properly aligned chain. Right, we're getting to the end now. All that is required now is to tighten the axle nut to the correct torque, ensure the adjuster nuts and plates are firmly fixed in position, and do the adjuster nuts up to the correct torque as well as refitting the chain guard. So tightening the axle nuts, and please don't forget this stage. If you ride around with a loose axle, it's likely to end badly for you. So double check that this is done. And it's strongly recommended that you use a torque wrench to torque them up to the manufacturer's recommended settings. On my bike, the torque setting for the rear axle is 98 Newton meters. After the rear axle is correctly torqued, ensure the adjuster swing arm plates are correctly located in the swing arm and lock the adjuster nuts using the lock nuts. Honda recommend torquing these to 21 Newton meters. But if you wish to torque them, you will need a long 12mm socket to fill over the thread. I personally use two spanners, being careful not to move the adjuster nuts. The final thing to do is just to refit the chain guard and lube up the chain. Right, lastly, how do we know when to replace the chain? Well, Only kindly have provided us with an indicator, as you can see on the video. When the centre of the rear axle moves into that red portion, the chain needs to be replaced. If you haven't got an indicator on your bikes, your sprockets will tend to be a very, very good indicator as to when the chain needs to be replaced. A worn sprocket is shown on the left, and if you would like to note the shape and how wide the teeth are when compared to an healthy sprocket, which is shown on the right, that will give you a good indication. If you do need to replace the chain or the sprockets, please replace them as a set, i.e. the front and rear sprockets plus the chain. That way they all wear consistently and you'll get longer life out of them. It's false economy to put an healthy chain on poor sprockets or vice versa. Anyway, that's it all done. Hopefully that helps someone, and good luck with when you come to sort of maintain your chain.